This video is sponsored by War Thunder. There is something unique about Vienna. The municipality owns 220,000 homes, housing about a third of the city's renters. Another quarter rents homes owned by an NGO, and this places over half the city's residents in public housing units. But that system is under pressure.
Around 90,000 people claimed political asylum here.
For the first time since the Second World War, a far-right party has come top in the country's general election.
For years, Vienna has been the fastest growing city in Europe after Stockholm, and this is mostly driven by immigration. They also have a relatively low cost of housing compared to similar cities. And historically, whenever waves of immigrants came to Austria, they sought for ways to exclude them from public housing and to push them to the more expensive private sector. These policies were key to keeping housing in Vienna affordable, but they're accused of being racist and discriminatory. And under pressure from the EU, they had to make changes. But given the soaring rent increases that many cities in the West are facing, are these selective policies perhaps a necessary evil? This is Austria's housing crisis with hindsight.
The Austrian capital is again the world's most livable city.
Vienna has retained its ranking as the world's most livable city.
Much of the praise about Vienna's housing market concerns renting, but with such a large percentage of homes in public hands, it is difficult to own. Only 20% of residents own their house. While Vienna has a relatively affordable rental market, they rank as the 5th most expensive city in Western Europe to buy. And compared to the European average, home prices are increasing much faster in Austria and Vienna. And this has everything to do with public housing. So before we look at those housing policies that are targeting immigrants, let's take a look at public housing in general and to see whether it's desirable. In the early 1900s, Vienna was in terrible shape. Living conditions were so poor that an average unqualified worker had a life expectancy of just 33 years. The city was dirty, overcrowded, and much of this was due to Vienna's rapid population growth. Their population had grown from less than 500,000 to over 2 million, and they weren't prepared. By 1910, over 500,000 people had been homeless at some point. That's a quarter of the city's population. These were problems that they had to deal with, and the change came in the 1920s. A new government was elected, and their strategy was to build public housing. They built a couple of thousand units each year, starting in the 1920s. These homes were managed by a non-profit organization. A family in regular housing paid on average 25% of their income on rent. These public housing units were priced at just 3.5% of a worker's income. By the 1930s, about 1 in every 10 residents of Vienna lived in such public housing, and its construction mostly stopped by the late 1930s. Then, after World War II, in the 1950s and 60s, public housing went through a revival. The economy of Austria was growing fast. Living standards were improving and wages increasing, but they were reaching an inflection point. In 1968, 38,000 people were unemployed, and there were 51,000 unfilled job vacancies. In other words, they needed more workers if they wanted their economy to continue growing, and Austria started looking abroad for solutions. They first made a deal with Turkey and later Yugoslavia to recruit tens of thousands of guest workers for specific sectors where labor shortages were acute. This led to a rapid influx of people, putting pressure on Vienna's housing market, and the municipality responded in 2 ways. First, they drastically increased the number of public housing units that were built each year, with a peak in 1968. And secondly, they passed laws that specifically targeted migrants from Turkey and Yugoslavia to mostly exclude them from public housing. These homes that had become a cornerstone of Vienna's housing market were for Austrian citizens only. That's where the left voiced criticism. They called it racist and discrimination. Throughout history, Vienna directed much of its public subsidies to building affordable public housing units that were built and managed by non-profits. Today, 60% of Vienna's residents live in public houses. But the EU caught wind of these policies in the early 2000s, and they demanded that Austria stopped right away. And that's when the system began to crumble. And that brings us to the heart of the problem. Whereas Austria wanted to prioritize people with an Austrian passport, the EU said that everybody had to be treated equally. And I'll get exactly into what is happening today. But first, a quick word from our sponsor. War Thunder is the most comprehensive vehicle combat game ever made, and it's available now for free on PC, consoles and mobile devices. You can be in the driver's seat of over 2,500 tanks, planes, helicopters and ships of over 10 major nations, ranging from the supersonic era all the way to the 1920s. They have been intricately modeled to provide realistic damage, and it comes together with spectacular graphics and authentic sound effects. There is simply no game better suited for fans of military history. Click the link in the pinned comment or description. If you're new or you haven't played in the last 6 months, you'll get a massive bonus pack across PC and console, including multiple premium vehicles. Try it today. Vienna has achieved an incredibly high standard of living. That's what the Global Livability Index measures. They look at different indicators like healthcare, education and infrastructure, and every year they publish a list of the most livable cities in the world. Vienna ranked as the most livable city in the world for a third year in a row. You can imagine that a city with such a reputation becomes a prime destination for immigrants, and Vienna wanted to protect itself from the potential drawbacks of mass migration. In 2004, several Eastern European countries joined the EU, and Austria feared that this would lead to an influx of migrants from these countries. But the EU didn't just enlarge. They also added significantly more rules that member states had to follow. One of them concerned the status of third country nationals, people with a migration background from a country that is not within the EU. The law stated that long-term residents shall enjoy equal treatment with nationals. This was quite a disruption for Vienna, because historically they had always given preferential treatment to people with an Austrian nationality. That is one of the ways in which they sought to protect its public housing stock. But these policies clashed with the ideals that the EU was striving to uphold. For these newly joined EU countries, Austria established a transition period of 7 years. During this time, only people working in sectors with labor shortages could legally move to Austria. For all non-EU migrants, they made it mandatory to pass a German language and integration exam in order to access all social services. These policies always targeted specific groups of people. It used to be guest workers from Turkey and Yugoslavia. Then later, it became people from Eastern European countries. And now, everything is different.
Nearly 11,000 migrants walked into Austria on Sunday.
Around 90,000 people claimed political asylum here.
The 2015 migrant crisis was a wake-up call.
More and more children are among the migrants passing through this town, many of whom are seen playing amid leftover food remnants and trash.
One of the most traveled routes was from Turkey, through the Balkans, towards Austria. For some migrants, this was the destination, but many just passed through the country on their way to Germany, the UK and Sweden. At some point in Hungary, thousands of migrants were stuck at a train station, but the train just wouldn't come. They decided to go to Austria on foot. At the same time, police chiefs in countries along this route joined forces and facilitated trains to transfer these refugees rapidly to Austria. The initial response there was welcoming.
Around 20,000 people on Monday evening took part in a pro-refugee rally in Vienna.
Austria became amongst the countries with the highest numbers of refugees per capita. During these years, their refugee population increased substantially, but the welcoming sentiment of Austrians would soon change.
Festung Europa, macht die Grenzen nicht!
Unkontrollierte Flüchtlinge sind hier in Österreich sicher nicht willkommen.
The country was torn between camps opposing migration and those with more tolerant views.
Das Flüchtlingsthema wird groß aufgeblasen. Es geht eigentlich ganz gut in Österreich. Die Wirtschaft ist am Florieren, den Leuten geht's gut.
But the mainstream was becoming more critical.
Austria's right-wing Freedom Party has beaten mainstream parties by a large majority in the country's presidential election.
This affected the housing market in ways that you might not expect. This is Vienna's housing stock by type. These two categories are what I call public housing. About a third of people live in privately rented homes, and just about 20% are homeowners. In the beginning, most refugees were housed in emergency shelters, but those who stayed could often only find accommodation in the private sector. That EU law made it mandatory for Austria to treat long-term citizens and its residents in exactly the same way, but they found somewhat of a workaround. Basically what they did is that they made it mandatory for refugees to have at least 2 years of legal residence within the country before they could apply for public housing. As a result, most people ended up in the private sector with limited tenant protection. This limited the impact of mass migration to low-cost private rentals in certain neighborhoods. This is what some despised, particularly on the left. There was a housing crisis, but the system was designed for this to affect migrants and to a much lesser extent people with an Austrian nationality. Today, the city of Vienna is incredibly multicultural. 45% of residents were born abroad, and in some neighborhoods it's over half. The largest ethnic groups are from Serbia, Turkey, and Germany. For many decades, Vienna prioritized subsidizing the construction of public housing units, whereas many other countries like the United States often prioritized subsidizing people. Most people that rent public housing are middle-income earners. But even a significant share of the top income earners rent public housing units. But there is a major drawback to this, because the municipality owns such a large percentage of all homes in the city that it has become incredibly difficult for people like you and me to go and buy a house. That's one of the reasons why Vienna ranks as one of the most expensive cities in Western Europe, where it costs over 13 times the annual income to buy a home. The main priority, historically, has always been to strengthen the rental market. The city of Vienna now owns the largest share of its own housing stock of any major city in the West. And as these homes increase in value, who is getting richer? The answer is not you. Those in favor of the system say that it's good because housing should not be a commodity for building wealth, it should be a human right. But I still want to own my home. I don't want to be paying off somebody else's mortgage, especially if that mortgage is from the government that I'm already paying my taxes to. And that brings us to this chart from the beginning. Home prices in Austria and Vienna increased much faster than the EU average. Vienna might be a renter's utopia, it's a homeowner's nightmare. Thanks again to War Thunder for sponsoring today's video. You can play this game for free on PC, PlayStation, Xbox or mobile devices by using my link in the pinned comment or description. If you're new or you haven't played in the last 6 months, you'll get a massive bonus pack across PC and console, including multiple premium vehicles. Try it today.